Kingdom Two Crowns is a really unique 2D side-scrolling game that kind of overlaps a couple of different genres. Let's check it out. A quick note up front, this is not a microtransaction game. Despite how it might look with the little coins flying all over the place and stuff, this isn't one of those games where you pay microtransactions everywhere if you want to be successful. Anyway, I picked up this game a few months ago as part of a charity bundle. At first, I wasn't especially interested as I was going down the list of the 30 or so games in the bundle, trying each one for like 2 or 3 minutes and making a list of which ones I wanted to do any content with. I put Kingdom Two Crowns in the B tier at first. Then, a few weeks later, one of my friends posted on social media, entirely by coincidence, that he was hooked on it, and that got my attention. So I fired it up and gave it another look. Oh boy, am I glad I did, because this game is wonderful. The basic premise is a dynamic combination of a city builder with tower defense and exploration, presented in an absolutely beautiful 2D pixel art graphic style. Seriously, just look at the water on the bottom of the screen. Despite the low resolution pixel art, this game is just beautiful to look at. On that second try, I intended to give the game about 15 minutes, but before I knew it, almost 3 hours had passed. Once you figure out the basics, the game is addicting far more than you think it might be. Now, this is actually the third game in a series, and by this point, most of the rough edges have been ironed out. When you start off, and at a few points along the way, a friendly ghost will give you a little tutorial help pointing the way, but otherwise you're kind of left to figure out a lot of the mechanics on your own, and that actually ends up being half the fun. If you pick this game up, I strongly suggest not using any walkthroughs or tutorials on your first playthrough. The core mechanic is really to try and balance the coins you earn from a bunch of different sources against what you need to spend to explore 5 islands while defending against these little creatures called the Greed, and also paying attention to the size of your coin purse. Any excess money you get will literally just fall off into the water. Now, these little guys called the Greed, they come out and they attack your kingdom at night, trying to steal your coins. And eventually, if you don't have any left and they get your player, they'll steal your crown, which basically ends the game and forces you to respawn as your ruler's heir back at the beginning on the first island. On each island, you explore sideways in 2 directions and kind of slowly expand your little kingdom by building fortifications, defensive towers, farms, and other buildings in different combinations, as the Greed attack in progressively stronger waves that ramp up slowly, but they do eventually get strong enough to force you into upgrades and expanding your defenses. On each island, there's a shipwreck that you can repair to build a boat and use it to travel to other islands, where you can get new resources, such as a stone quarry that allows you to further upgrade your structures and population. Speaking of which, your kingdom's population is made up of random little peasants that you recruit from the countryside that periodically respawn, and while you don't directly control them, you build equipment for them to pick up that will determine their role: builders, archers, and farmers. Further upgrades can turn some of your archers into melee fighters and squad leaders who can lead attacks against the Greed. I don't want to spoil too much in this review, but managing your population and their jobs ends up being one of the most challenging parts of the game, but it's also a lot of fun. Along the way, your monarch, your player, can unlock new mounts to tame, with options ranging from a great stag to a griffin to a giant lizard, and the expansion packs even add things like an undead steed, a Kyrin, and a chariot pulled by huge cats. How fun is that? Some of the mounts give you special abilities that you can use to attack the Greed or travel faster, and picking the right mount is another kind of dynamic element of the game that shouldn't be overlooked. One of the things I enjoy the most is that there are some DLC expansion packs, and a couple of them are free by the way, which give you some more game modes to play in. You can play in a version of the base game that's reskinned into a feudal Japanese setting. You can play through a Gothic kind of setting based on the Bloodstained series of games, and a Viking kingdom inspired by elements of Norse mythology. The Gothic and Viking expansions introduce some new, or significantly changed at least, game mechanics into the base game, and it really helps keep things fresh, being able to switch between those. So, how do you win? Well, the idea is that you have to expand your kingdom on each island in both directions to wipe out the greed and push them back further and further. In one direction, you'll push them back to a pier with a portal on it, where you can destroy the pier, destroy the portal, and build a lighthouse. And on the other end, you make your way to a volcano where the greed are organizing from. On the later islands, and there are progressively more portals on each side that you need to attack and fight past as you go along, you can upgrade your main hall far enough, and you can eventually construct a huge bomb that will allow your troops to follow you into the volcano on one side of the island and blow it up to seal off any more greed attacks. You repeat that on all 5 islands to beat the game. It sounds simple, but it gets really complicated as you end up having to go back and forth between islands. Your buildings will slowly decay while you're on another island, so you'll need to find rare diamonds in the later islands to unlock some of the upgrades on the earlier islands, so on and so on. At the time of writing this review, I've got almost 35 hours in-game according to Steam, and I'm still discovering new little upgrades and tricks. And despite the premise seeming really simple on the surface, new layers just keep revealing themselves as you peel away the onion. Now, I do have a few gripes, but they're not major. The first thing is that your Monarch's mount has stamina. Now, the real point of that mechanic is to make sure that you can't always outrun the greed when they attack, so you actually have to build defenses to hide behind and recruit archers and stuff. But the problem is, in peacetime during the day, it can be really tedious to run from one side of your island to the other, having to stop so that your mount can graze on grass or otherwise recharge before being able to run again. After you attack the portals on some of the later islands, you can construct some, like, two-way portals, but that only mitigates this problem to a small degree. Some mounts are more mobile than others, but the stamina mechanic on the mounts, it makes sense as a game mechanic, but it just feels a little too tedious the way that they've implemented it. Next, and this is one of the few things that I am going to spoil, it's obvious pretty early on that you need to find diamonds to unlock some of the upgrades, like the little shrines and buildings that you can find buried out in the woods. But you can't find any diamonds on the first island. And that is a very important detail that you don't have any way to find out until you just give up and move on. I wasted at least a few hours messing around on the first island before I just gave up on it. And then I found diamonds on the second island and kind of did a little bit of a head desk. I don't really mind that the game doesn't hold your hand, and I like having to explore the mechanics, but that one detail is incredibly fundamental, and I feel like it should have been a little more obvious. My last gripe is the seasonal cycle. The game cycles back and forth very slowly between summer and winter, and during the winter, your income is dramatically reduced, since your farmer's activities are far more limited. That's another element I really wasn't prepared for, and sometimes I find winter really starting at some inconvenient times, and it ends up being an enormously time-consuming setback to suffer through winter and needing to use 100% of your income fighting off the greed without feeling like you're making any progress. Now, you can still make money during the winter, and can make some progress, but the pace of the game just comes way down. I kind of wish that there was some other unique bonus or something that you only got during the winter to offset the suffering, or maybe if like the greed were slower because they're freezing, and maybe there is and I just haven't found it yet, but so far, the winters are just really tedious. Okay, so what do I like about the game? Well, pretty much everything else. The visual style really appeals to me, and I've always been, a big fan of this kind of medium resolution pixel art combined with modern high resolution lighting effects and shading. The gameplay mechanics seem simple, but they quickly get pretty deep after about half an hour of gameplay, and it actually gets a bit intense if you crank up the difficulty setting. The music is moody and atmospheric, and the animation on all the sprites is just incredibly well done. I really enjoyed the exploration and discovery aspect of the game, with the one caveat I mentioned about not knowing how to get diamonds. Overall, Kingdom 2 Crowns is a very well put together game, and although the first 10 minutes are pretty slow, it gets really addicting after that. If you enjoy tower defense style games, city builders, or if you just enjoy this art style, you should really give this one a look. It's out on a whole bunch of different platforms, and it's actually a pretty cheap buy. I'm completely hooked, and as always, thanks for watching.